Vanakkam. Hello, friends. So far, we have seen how these Tamil regions have been continuously occupied for over 400,000 years, the evidence being the Paleolithic tools found in Athirampakkam, Chengalpat district that were carbon luminescence dated to 385,000 plus or minus 17,000 years ago, evidence of the existence of an early Homo species in those regions. This was followed by a middle Paleolithic age where between 200,000 and 100,000 years ago, more tools were recovered in the Kudiyam caves of Tiruvallur district. And after a long gap, by around 65,000 years ago, there came in another migration of an evolved Homo species, the Homo sapien, the Latin wise man, and they came, they saw, and they stayed. How do we know this? Because the genetic markers of the out of Africa migrants are still carried by the ancient ancestral South Indians, that is us. And the mutations in these markers are not found anywhere outside these regions. We have covered this in detail in our previous episodes, and I'm leaving the relevant links here. With the advent of our ancestors, the older Homo species in these regions became extinct due to a number of reasons that we will not go into now. But to understand just how old a population we are, it is interesting to see that the continents of the Americas were populated for the very first time just 16,000 years ago by the modern human who crossed into Alaska from Siberia using the Bering Land Bridge. We also saw how these human migrations overlapped with the climatic conditions of the globe that periodically went through glacial and interglacial periods. And there was an interglacial period MIS4 that happened between 71,000 to 57,000 years ago, at which time these migrations happened out of Africa. So, what could have been the pattern of settlement of the migrants who came into the subcontinent all those 65,000 years ago? It is believed they followed two routes to come into the subcontinent, a sub Himalayan route and a coastal route. The Himalayan regions, with its cold climes and the lower levels full of thick, dense jungles, wouldn't have been a very friendly place to settle, forcing the migrants to move further down south, where the mighty Ganges and several rivers in those days were much wider and higher, and hence often changed courses, leading to marshy lands along the river valleys, which were totally unfit for human settlement. Coming further down, south of the Gangetic Plain, there was yet another stretch of dense jungle, the Dandakaranya, that occupied the regions between the Aravali Range and the Vindhya Mountains. And come south of the Vindhya Mountains, the land, along with the coastal stretches, was a little higher than the sea level, with a very equable climate then, as is now, with a very thin spread of jungle. The jungle spread was so thin that it could not support the animal force of human beings infest itself in large numbers, and these regions, especially the coastal regions, had a number of caves and natural vegetation and freshwater springs. And before early man learned how to build his own shelter and how to make a pot to store water, he found refuge in these shelters that gave him easy access to fresh water. While early man had not the need to seek refuge into deep caverns to escape from the glacial epochs, because South India hardly faced any glacial epoch. Instead, what we had here was known as the pluvial epoch, a very, very wet climate. His counterparts in Europe, the Paleolithians, had to stay in caverns for long periods of glacial times, because of which their leftover fossils have been recovered today, helping archaeologists and genetic scientists understand ancient history. Whereas in these regions, the pluvial epoch, with its torrential monsoon rains, washed away ancient skeletons into the oceans. And what was left behind was eaten up by the tropical heat as well as the jungle insects, especially the termite, the white ant. And the earliest fossil finds in these regions, as we saw in a previous episode, have been at the Fahayan caves in the Kalutara district of Sri Lanka, dated to just 30,000 years ago. With a lack of fossil finds, how did archaeologists date the time and the area of settlements of the early man? By the next best available marker, his tools. Man is a tool making animal, defined anthropologists, and the Paleolithic, meaning old stone tools, were found in plenty in South India, especially along the periphery of the Deccan Plateau from Kadapa and Kurnool in Andhra to Gundur and Nellore districts, in the Dharwar and Bijapur districts to North Arcot and Chengalpat, as we saw. And Paleolithic man progressed to the Mesolithic age, which denoted the making of finer microlithic tools, which improved his hunting skills, that helped him to expand further into newer territories. And the earliest available microlithic tools in India were found at the Mehtakeri caves in Madhya Pradesh, dated to 45,000 years ago. While the rest of the world plunged into an ice age by around 29,000 years ago, here in the south, with no glacial age whatsoever, people seem to have been happily expanding. And we saw in an earlier episode of a very interesting study published by the anthropologist Michael Petraglia et al. In the year 2009, the population and environmental deterioration corresponding with microlithic innovation, in which it was estimated that between 45,000 and 25,000 years ago, most of the humanity that populated Mother Earth was living in South Asia, and following this, a population explosion of an unparalleled nature was seen in these regions of the world. Eventually, the world entered a warmer phase, the Holocene, around 11,700 years ago, in which we still live, and this overlapped with the Neolithic or New Stone Tool age, by which time our ancestors had firmly entrenched themselves in their comfortable environs of the hilly terrains of the south, the Kurinji territory. In his book, Stone Age India, published in the year 1929, the historian P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar, PTS, makes many interesting observations of the evolution of the life of the AASI, the ancient ancestral South Indians. For example, starting with their eating habits, they lived in a region that was rich in vegetation, offering them fruits and nuts, greens and herbs. And from then until now, the Western and Eastern Ghats, with their rich biodiversity attesting to their antiquity, were found home to several primitive anthropoid apes such as the gibbon, the chimpanzee, and the gorilla, and probably man observed these apes and found it safe to eat what these apes ate. He was more of a gatherer and a hunter, later on adding small game to his diet. This was diametrically opposite to his European counterparts who had to subsist on meat because of the lack of vegetation in those regions. Again, our ancestors in these parts must have roamed around in the nude for a very long time thanks to the favorable climatic conditions, and he was denuded of his body hair very early on. And eventually, when he decided to clothe himself, what did he use? He used the inner bark of trees known as the tree flay, Maravuri in Tamil, to dress himself, a practice that continued again for a very, very long time. Remember, in these parts of the country, nudity was celebrated. So, what was considered as holy next to nudity was the Maravuri, and associated with the ascetics and sages who lived in the forests. Later, when he hunted the tiger was the predator in these regions and not the lion. He wore the hide of the tiger on his back, maybe to show his fearlessness and bravery. And later, he learned to hunt the deer for its flesh and used its hide as well. And the tiger and the deer skin over the ages got divine sanctity as well, with Lord Shiva being shown as wearing the tiger skin and yogis seating on the deer skin during their penance. PTS writes that early on, men in these regions must have also designed weapons from wood. Hardwood of several kinds populated the forests of these regions, so he would have crafted his clubs and spears, and though they were all eaten up by the forest termites and heat, How do we know that he used them? Remnants of this practice attested to by the clubs and spears that are held in the hands of the gods and heroes of the Tamil country. And PTS points out how the Marauri or the hide was always worn over the left shoulder of the man. Why? Simply to free his right hand to hold his weapon with which he could smash his predators. And this practice was followed for a long time to come by men, right from the Greeks to the Indians. The royalty and priestly class were always shown as wearing their garments over their left shoulder, so much so in these regions they even came up with a term for it, Upavidham, the way of dressing of the Devas, as opposed to Pradachinavitam, draped across the right shoulder, associated with the way of dressing of the Asuras. Coming next to art, cave art associated with the Mesolithic age was found in many parts of Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Odisha, and Tamil Nadu. Ancient Paleolithic cave paintings were found in Kombekkadu, Alampadi, Padiyendal, Keelvalai, Nehanurpatti, where Robert Sprucefoot opined that the cave paintings could have been around 30,000 to 10,000 years old because of the similarity of styles that he found that resembled the cave paintings of Bhimbetka in Madhya Pradesh that have been given a very early dating. Cave art was also found in the Nilgiri Hills and Andipatti Hills, and Robert Brucefoot opined that because of the prevalence of many colored clays and ochres in these areas, cave art should have flourished and should have been as old as found in the other regions of the world, such as those of France that are dated to 30,000 BCE. He was of the opinion that the older layers of paintings should have been destroyed by the termites and the tropical heat and must have been painted over by later cave dwellers. He noted that the caves and caverns deep inside the Indian tropical forests should be explored methodically. Today, the oldest cave paintings in the world have been found in the Blombos caves of Africa that were explored for the first time as late as in the 1990s, with continuous explorations going on. The cave art found in these regions have been dated back to an astonishing 73,000 years ago. But what is more intriguing for researchers is that the figures that have been made with red ochre are not that of animals or stick figurines, but of grid like patterns. Could these have been the attestation of the earliest rituals of man? Now, what is more intriguing is that red ochre has been associated with rituals across all ancient cultures and have been continuing their association in some ancient cultures like the Tamil culture, where red ochre is used by us even today to decorate our columns on auspicious days, the kavi, and also to paint the walls of our temples and temple tanks in a grid line pattern. Could the out of Africa ancestors brought this practice with them? As early as between the 1860s and 1890s, Robert Brucefoot did extensive exploration of South India and discovered numerous sites that threw up not only Paleolithic tools but pottery shards as well. And based on his findings, he determined four archaeological ages for these regions: Paleolithic age, Neolithic age, early Iron Age, and late Iron Age. And he was of the opinion that South India never having to face a glacial epoch, the transition from the Paleolithic into the Neolithic times should have happened rather smoothly. In the Gundar basin of the Varasanadu Andipatti hills west of Madurai, an offshoot of the Western Ghats, as early as in 1883, Robert Bruce Foote explored several sites that had lithic tools located near the regions of the birth of the river Vaihe. He observed that further exploration was to be taken up in these regions. Further exploration was taken up only in the 1950s by Professor K.V. Raman, head of the Department of Ancient History and Archaeology in the University of Madras. He systematically documented the finds in these regions that showed subsistent settlement patterns over time, and his documentation formed the foundation for further research taken up by archaeologist Selva Kumar, who from the year 1990 explored these regions further extensively and in the year 2002 published his paper, The Hunter-Gatherer Adaptations Around Madurai, in which he recorded several test sites such as Kanavaipatti and S. Papanayakanpatti, where the human fossils were found, and fluorine phosphate dating of these fossils showed values similar to samples from other regions of India that are dated back to 10,000 BCE. He concluded that the Gundar regions, with their innumerable rock shelters, should have been continuously occupied for at least 12,000 years, by whom? The Paliyars, a tribal people who have been living in these regions continuously till the British and later on our own government displaced them in the name of development. They had been living a life of seclusion, and very interestingly, Selvakumar notes that the Paliyars living in the Varsanadu Andipatti hills were following the age-old practice of using quads and iron tools to start fires till a few decades ago, and their staple diet continued to be honey and roots and tubers such as yam and small game, and they still continue to live in the fringes of the hills of South India such as Nilagiri and Saduragiri. And remember, we saw in a previous episode of how these hill tribes carried up to 95% of the original haplogroup mtDNA, the mitochondrial DNA of our out of Africa ancestors. Why? Because of their living in seclusion. And we also saw about a very interesting paper published by Irina Pugak et al. In the year 2013. The genome-wide data substantiate Holocene gene flow from India to Australia. While studying the Australian Aborigine population, these researchers found that they carried strong genetic markers that belonged to South Indian tribes that had arrived in the regions of Australia 4,230 years ago, based on fossil finds. And they traced these genes to the Kurumbar and Senchu tribes of South India, indicating a substantial migration when these early populations moved to Australia, maybe starting around 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, where they had to walk across the shallow seas to reach the Australian continent. They not only took with them their genetic marker, but also the Tamil language, as is evidenced by the number of Tamil words that are found in the language of the Aborigines till date. We explored the antiquity of Tamil language in these regions that should have existed from Neolithic times, and PTS reflects in his Stone Age India an opinion given by many linguists who have explored the Dravidian languages. The fact of the matter is that from Neolithic times, the people of India spoke different dialects of one original language family, which was not the Indo-European family. Refuting the claims that the Dravidian languages should have been brought into the subcontinent over a period of time, PTS also writes, surely the Neolithians of India were not dumb animals but spoke a language of their own. So here were our ancestors living peacefully in the Kurinji Hills for tens of thousands of years with their own language and culture, making us one of the oldest continuously living populations in the world. And logically, Kurinji, with its natural shelters, was the first region that he occupied, and early man literally venerated the caves that protected him from the vagaries of weather and from the wild animals and insects of the jungle. Cave, Guhai, Guhan, Kundirukkum Idamellam, Guhanirukkum Idam, Guhan, Kumaran, Murugu, the antiquity of the worship of this Murugu deity that we traced all the way to the Indus and back, and probably the wooden spear that our ancestor used became the veil in Murugan's hand from the territories of the Kurinji to the pastoral lands of Mullai. We will continue with our exploration of our roots in the next episode. Vanakkam.